This is a meeting of the Planning Board Subcommittee on January 9th, 2014, discussing the proposed stormwater management ordinance. Why don't you start?
Okay, so I will, when was our last workshop? It was like late November, early December, or something like that?
Early December, I think it was
Okay.
December 19th, it says on.
Well, yeah, December 19th was a couple of days before the workshop that we were going to be having just before Christmas, which we didn't have. So,
Yeah.
so our last workshop was prior. Okay, so the bottom line here is, at our last workshop, we were sort of kind of doing the final hashing out of much of this. But it was basically more looking at my chicken scratching from my notes from the previous one. So we agreed that on the follow-up workshop, which is tonight, I would have a kind of put together all the chicken scratching into an actual document that we could then look at without me having to sort of reconstruct it on the fly as we were talking about it. So here we go. And essentially I'm just going to look at the items which I believe were part of that reconstruction effort. So I'll just sort of continue on here. So I'm on page 2 at this moment. Okay, so on page 2, in the middle of it, disconnected impervious cover. It has received more than its due of consideration over the last few workshops. I did not change that during that reconstruction, so that is still the definition that Jess had suggested 2 workshops ago, which she then subsequently apparently was somewhat dissatisfied with. So rather than reinventing the wheel multiple times, I opted to just leave that definition there in anticipation of a future discussion with Jess, and she's not here tonight.
Yeah.
So that will just sort of sit there for the moment.
Well, can we have some consensus on whether or not we would like that?
Well, I think that the week before, or the workshop before, the 3 of us, maybe I'm fitting here, hold on. Okay, so what I have here is the last piece of paper I was looking at was the draft version 3 from November 12th. This is 4, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So it was November 12th that we last, let me just see what's going on.
I thought we gave it a...
Yes, 3 out of the 4 of us, because there was only 3 of us there, said, yeah, I think we're reasonably satisfied with that. So that's where we left it.
I would suggest that we just keep that.
Okay, and I'm good with that. So in summary, there was one definition that was there that I think was somewhat lacking, and I think we were all in agreement on that. We had 2 potential definitions to replace it, either one of which I would be happy with, and this just happens to be one of those 2, and it'll either remain this way or not as we move forward. Okay, so I guess it'd be useful for me to kind of go through both. Okay, so on page 3, talking about peak flow.
Okay. Before we leave that,
And then
page 2.
permit, that's it.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Could I just get a citation on, because I have Jess's 10/29/13 thing, and it's not on that. I'm just wondering what is the piece of paper that thing is on? Is it
Yeah,
part of
there's a
the
picture
graphics?
on it.
You're talking about the definition of disconnected impervious cover?
Yeah.
Or have we moved on from there?
No, that's what it's.
I just
this
wanted
is
to
the-
get us, okay.
Pretty sure the one.
Okay, so I've got a couple of,
I want to just find.
okay, so as of,
Is there a date on that?
No.
I think it was around middle of September. Yes, okay. So, let me just double check that it's what this says. I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. Yeah.
I think we did read through that, somebody read aloud and someone read,
Yep.
followed it with their eyes on them.
So the only difference is that this one has a capital I on impervious as it's starting the definition, and this one to dovetail with what's already in this document has a lowercase I, but as far as the words go, it is what she had brought in around middle of September when we were talking about. I think that was around the same time because these two pieces of paper went together when I was kicking up a fuss about replacing the gravel and having it being replaced by
Yeah.
whatever. So I could, in fact, look it through these drafts and find where that got changed and then give you a better idea about when we discuss this, but I don't think I'm gonna burn up time
I'll find it.
right now doing that. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is at the bottom of page 3 in this V4 document, permit by notification. So it's not my intent that what you see here is going to be what is in the final document, but what I wanted to do is provide the background of what these really are and perhaps where it came from. So the permit from by notification is actually a paraphrase from a des.nh.gov webpage that talks about wetlands. So this was similar enough that I thought that that's in fact where this comes from. So the current definition of permit by notification is, in this document, is a streamlined permitting process for certain minimum impact projects that propose impacts to protected resources. The rules and process identify certain projects in wetlands or surface waters or other protected resource areas that are minimum impact if carried out according to the requirements in the rules. And then from the des.nh.gov webpage, it says, the permit by notification, PBN, is a streamlined permitting process for certain minimum impact projects that propose impacts to resources protected under the dredge and fill law, RSA 482-9.
Can we suspend the reading there?
We certainly can.
Let's try to dive into the text of this and find out. It bothers me that it is a New Hampshire bit of terminology and it refers again to...
Well, before we delve into that, I'd like to add one other point, and that's a little thing immediately following there with a little arrow, suggested addition. All I'm really suggesting, and I would say I am not 6 of one, half dozen of the other if you choose to put this in there or not, but for my purposes, the key elements of permit by notification versus permit by rule is, one, you're waiting for a response and one, you are not, and neither of these definitions say anything about that. So my suggestion is that whatever you choose to use for your definition, it would either include or end, conclude with such a permit is validated by the absence of an explicit denial within a defined period of time, or something to that effect. That is in effect what a permit by notification is. When it's used or where it's used, which is what this definition is currently focusing on, is sort of irrelevant to the definition of a permit by notification, in my opinion, for what it's worth.
Do you have a citation of where it is used in the body of the...
Yeah, the permit by notification in this document?
Yes.
Yes, if you go to page, talking about incidental level of disturbance, and page 6, 1 minute, probably 7, yes. If you look at the top of page 7, item 2, an application for a permit by notification and an LID plan shall be submitted to the code enforcement officer at least 10 working days in advance of the commencement of the work. And if not revised by the code enforcement officer within 10 working days of submission, then the permit shall become valid and shall give permission to the code enforcement officer or to or other town-approved third-party inspector to review the LID plan, blah, blah, blah. So the point here, and it's kind of spelled out in the non-incidental disturbance, that basically unless they get back to you within 10 working days, you're good. And that's why it's a permit by notification, it's not a permit by rule. So it is used in that one spot.
Could we substitute their permit by rule and assume that 2A takes care of the reservation that you have there about lack of information as to how
Well,
that's enacted?
I don't think we should be changing the guidelines of what's supposed to happen in order to accommodate the definition.
But the definition is drawn from New Hampshire terminology and any citation.
Okay. The permit by notification definition is largely in agreement with when we're using it. But it doesn't say anything about the fact that you're not gonna get a response. If you're lucky, you're not gonna get a response, and then you're good. It doesn't say anything about it.
It doesn't in the
That's my point.
definition. It doesn't in the definition.
That's
but
correct.
In the text of,
In the text, it does.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So
That is true.
you wouldn't come upon, you wouldn't go to this document and start reading definitions. You would go to the document and start reading.
If you choose to sort of, use the old tunnel vision and say, okay, well, I don't see anything wrong with that definition as it is, I'm good to go. I don't see any legal ramification of leaving it exactly the way it is. I'm just pointing out that it's missing a key element.
What I'm suggesting is that could we substitute, or I don't see that we even have a definition for permit by rule in here. Yes, we do.
Well, we do, yeah,
Page
just
4.
immediately following it, which is similar kind of a thing.
Can we just substitute, what I'm asking is, can we substitute on page 7, the citation that asks for a permit by notification with the terminology permit by rule?
Absolutely not, because it's different. Okay, so basically what this is saying on 7 is you're submitting a permit by notification. And what that means is, in this case, and this spells it out here, which is great, it says if you get a response from the code enforcement officer within 10 working days, then somehow or other he's modified what you're requesting and you're gonna have to be talking a little bit more about it. But if you get no response within those 10 days, then it goes into effect. And that's what makes it a permit by notification.
And what is the conflict of plugging in the terminology permit by rule?
Because permit by rule means that you have to receive a response. It does not go into effect by the passage of time. It goes into effect by the code enforcement officer telling you that it's in effect.
I think Kenny
Where-
says yes
which
or
is
no kind of
different.
anyway, no matter what.
Well,
Where are you getting that? I don't see that that's in the text.
well, that's not in this part of the text because this is not a permit by rule, it's a permit by notification.
Yeah, well, all I'm saying is.
Okay, let's talk about permit by rule.
Apply to the citation of 2A to the terminology of permit by rule. In the text on page 7, I don't see the problem.
7A is in reference to a permit by notification. It is not a permit by rule.
Yeah,
Permit by notification.
Paul,
Yes.
what would it be the harm in unplugging permit by notification and plugging in permit by rule and having it still abide by the citation under 2A?
Because in 2A,
That's essentially-
it would have to say, if it's somehow or other, okay, 2A does not say the CEO is going to get back to the applicant. It says they may, and if they do, you'll have more to discuss. But if he doesn't get back to the applicant, then it's going to go into effect by the passage of time. That is a permit by notification, just like it says here.
Right, and where's the conflict in using permit by rule, as defined on page 4?
It would change what happens here. This is not a permit by rule. A permit by rule says the CEO will get back to you.
That's what I'm asking you. Where are you getting that stipulation?
For what a permit by rule is?
I don't see where it says that the CEO is going to get back to you.
They don't necessarily have to because it's a permit by notification. I feel like we're going in circles here. What?
Well, we could move on to permit by rule.
Yeah, let's talk about that, and hopefully that will clear up the discrepancy here. Okay, so the next definition is permit by rule, and if you take a look, if you read to yourselves, the definition of permit by notification as printed in the document without all my extra stuff, okay? And the definition of permit by rule, they're largely similar.
Right.
They're very similar.
Right.
And neither one really tells you much of anything.
Neither one cites anything to do with the interaction that would proceed.
Right. Whether you're gonna get a response or not get a response or anything else. Not,
So why not just leave that in the text as it is now, and substitute permit by rule, which is a main terminology?
Okay, so let's talk about permit by rule, shall we? So I did a
Two are
Google search.
interchangeable. One is a New
They are-
Hampshire term, and one is a...
They are not interchangeable in my.
They are if you retain
belief.
2A and insert the word permit by rule where permit by notification is printed on page 7 under...
Okay, so you're assuming that these two terms are the same thing?
I'm assuming that we do not want to be using terminology that is New Hampshire based.
Okay, I hear you. But a permit by rule is not the same thing as a permit by notification. It
No,
has
they're
different
two
actions
different
expected.
definitions.
Okay,
Absolutely different.
so, having said that multiple times, let's go down to where we're using permit by rule in this document. Okay, I think that will help to clarify to either you or me how we can kind of get together on the same page here. So, if we go to now the non-incidental disturbance. It's not in really the same place here. Let me just find it. 1 second. I think it's in the general requirements. Let me just find it. It's much better hidden than the other one is.
I think the two terms are interchangeable.
Nope. Well, let's just say that if we're to assume that, you'd have to show me some solid evidence to that effect, and I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, here it says here at the 5252, page 8,
Page 8, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
stormwater management during disturbance or construction.
What's the number?
Number 1,
Number 1.
it's page 8. number
Oh,
1.
yes. So at the end of 1, on the top of page 8, and it's sort of a throwaway reference. It says, shall be subject to the state's Natural Resource Protection Act, including its permit by rule procedures. So that's really the only reference in this document to the phrase permit by rule. So I took a look on the web, did a Google search to say, okay, where does this come from, and can I find a definition? And lo and behold, on the general Google search out there in the big bad world, what I pulled up is the planning board meeting minutes of December 15, 2011, as in Acton Planning Board. And these meeting minutes are up on actonmaine.com. And in those meeting minutes are appended the first draft, and I think it represents the good old Lockman document way back when, and it represents that the first time that showed up and when it was being considered by the planning board, and it was tacked on to the end of the meeting minutes. And so the citation that we just read on page 8 is in fact substantially what was on that Lockman document back in 2011, which is what I pulled up on the Google search. So essentially what I got is a self-reference to the same document that we're in effect working with now. And the bottom line being, I was not able to find a definition in official state documentation, or otherwise really, of permit by rule. But in my opinion, I believe that permit by rule definition should conclude or include such a permit as validated by an explicit approval. We have a permit by rule, it is an application. Whoever you submit it to is going to consider it and then will respond to you, yes or no. And we'll have other considerations and other things that you need to do. But the point is, you're not gonna get your permit by the expiration of time, the passage of time. It's
Right,
going to be
right.
an interchange, and somebody's gonna say thumbs up or thumbs down, permit by rule. Permit by notification does not require a thumbs up.
Permit by rule works the exact same way that the terminology on page...
Page 8?
Yeah, works now. If you, and I think Virginia can vouch for this, because she's probably gotten some of this. If you're not contacted within 10 working days of submission of a permit by rule adjudication, issue, then you can go ahead and do the work.
That sounds like permit by notification.
Call it what you will. Those are the terms by which a permit by
Well-
rule works.
I would be delighted if you could find an official definition of those two things, because I am loath to
Well, if we won't find the permit by notification.
approve or consider a change that legally changes what this is intended to do.
um,
And I have not, unto myself,
But-
found a good definition.
You did just earlier state that the permit by notification definition and the permit by rule definition have no criterion pertaining to their working, so to speak, i.e. the passage of 10 working days. Does not go into how they work, it just goes into how they are,
What they pertain to.
what they pertain to, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And that's really what's missing, is how they work, not when you will use them. That to me doesn't make any sense to define it by when you would use it.
well, if you drop one of them, you do not need two of them because they are both basically the same terminology.
Okay, so that's where we disagree, that they mean the same thing.
Well, in the text that we're using, there is no criterion for the passage of time, i.e. in their implementation.
There is no statement of such
Right.
on page 8 when it uses permit by rule, that is true. But
if we
that-
use-
but that would not necessarily be expected to be there. You'd expect it to be, you'd be expected to know what a permit by rule is gonna do, or how it works. And I haven't found a really lucid definition of that yet.
Let me see if this will...
Doesn't it say right here, it says subject to the state's Natural Resource Protection Act, and then it quotes this thing.
Yep, including their permit by rule.
38 MRSA, and so you would assume that its permit by rule procedures would be in that
You
document.
would assume so, yes.
That's what it kind of
You would
makes it out to
certainly
look like.
assume so.
Yeah.
But so far I haven't found
Let
it
me ask you this work
online.
No.
We'll drop permit by notification and include the citation on page 7, item 2A, at the top of the page, in the definition of permit by rule.
Item 7, 2A.
Page 7, 2A. If not revised by the code enforcement officer.
Oh, yeah, but 7, 2A is specifically a permit by notification.
I'm saying there is no difference.
I know that you're saying that, but I don't agree with it.
Well, there is, if you were to...
And yes, we are spinning our wheels.
Yeah, but you're including a terminology that is replicated by another term in the document. They both essentially mean the same thing by definition. There is no glaring...
That's because neither one actually gets to the root of what
Okay, what I'm
defines either of
suggesting-
these two things.
What
And
I'm
that's
suggesting
kinda-
is, what I'm suggesting is
Yep.
because in the real world,
Yep,
permit by rule acts in the manner as described on page 7, item 2A. So if you would like clarity in the definition, merely omit permit by notification, retain permit by rule, and in a extra sentence add to it, if not revised by the code.
okay, so let me point out that on page 7A, where it says it's a permit by notification,
Right.
it says, goes on to explain what I would certainly agree is how a permit by notification would work, in that if it's not revised by the CEO within 10 working days of submission, then the permit shall become valid. Now, if it is not so 7A is talking about the passage of time allowing this to go into effect, correct?
Correct.
So that's what makes it permit by notification.
Correct.
If, on the other hand, the CEO responds and says, hey, no, that's not, we need this, we need that.
Which is precisely the process that is utilized now under the permit by rule statute.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is, the permit by rule is redundant, or permit by notification is redundant in this case. It's a New Hampshire terminology. All you need to do
Yeah,
is...
they probably just put them both in because we're on the state
Okay.
line, and they want to cover all the...
Shall we
But
table
nobody from
this?
Maine is going to be getting
They wouldn't
New
know.
Hampshire. No.
Shall we table this discussion for when we actually when we're doing our citations, and we have to come up with some, at least draft form of a permit by notification
Well, what
that would be used for this document,
I'm suggesting to
or
you that
something that's called a permit by
the two
notification?
definitions are redundant.
Okay,
One
let's,
is a New Hampshire definition utilizing the same processes and applicability as the Maine definition.
I don't think it's
Currently-
necessarily that it's just
Currently-
two states that are involved. I mean,
Well-
there's a shortcoming in those definitions as they are stated right now. And if for you to
that
sort
be-
of draw conclusions from those flawed definitions, I think is
Would that be addressed
not
by...
a good idea.
Would that be addressed by including within the permit by rule, stating how the permit by rule currently actually works in repeating item 2A? Because you have to trust me on this, but after several years on the planning board, I can vouch that that is how the permit by rule works.
Permit by rule
Permit by rule.
is
Not
a
revised by-
time expiration.
If not revised by the code enforcement officer within 10 working days of submission of a permit by rule, then the permit shall become valid.
Okay, so maybe if we got a gander at the actual permit that it's talking about, is it talking about an actual physical piece of paper
Yeah.
that is submitted?
Yeah.
Okay, can we get a look at that physical piece of paper? I'm sure it would lay out how it works.
Our correspondent from Kenny Paul's office is coming in today. Okay.
I mean, if this piece of paper, which I think if we just avoid these two phrases,
Thank you, Brenda.
we can then, so does it say anything about what the expectations are for the handling of that? And that is a permit by rule?
It's called a permit by rule notification form.
All right, thank you for clarifying that for me.
What does it say about the working days issue?
Okay, so yeah, does it say anything about how it works?
It says for use with DEP regulation, chapter 305.
Okay, so the page 8 one is... Okay, so this one, the thing talking about permit by rule is the state's Natural Resource Protection Act, NRPA. And that's not what this is talking about. So this could be either one or both.
So this says, this permit is not valid until approved by the department or 14 days after receipt by the department, whichever is less.
Okay, so to me, in my possibly erroneous understanding of what a permit by rule is, I would think this is a permit by rule. Permit by rule notification form. Right. I also know this permit
So
is not
they-
valid
they
until
don't
approved by the
notify the person,
department.
they don't get the-
Okay, so, Tom, are you saying that both of these sections, the non-incidental and incidental, that we would potentially use the same hunk of paper? And I use the term hunk of paper so that we can avoid those phrases that have been spinning our wheels. Okay, so which one would this be used for? Would this be
Permit by
non-incidental
rule.
or incidental?
Permit by rule does involve the DEP, and maybe permit by notification does not involve the DEP, so...
Well, this says for use with DEP regulation, chapter
Yeah.
305.
Right.
So I think if we sort of work from the other end to say, okay, this is what we would use, This also clears up our citation, so I mean, it gets us further along in that respect, so we know what is being submitted. We know what it's called, we can then backfill what's supposed to happen, and hopefully the text of what is happening in these two sections here is gonna dovetail largely with what this form says. You know, so I'm good with however it turns out, but there needs to be consistency. And if part of that is gonna be dropping either or both of these terms, I'm good with that too.
Yeah, this is maybe one we can run by Ken.
Because this, you know, the way it said, this is not an expiration of time, it doesn't automatically go into effect. It requires a specific action, which means, to me, right or wrong, it's a permit by rule. And it is called a permit by rule notification form. So I would think that this would be used for the non-incidental. Although, perhaps, we need to go to the state's Natural Resource Protection Act, MRSA 480A-Z,
It's a much less rigorous,
because it's talking about its permit by rule procedure. So we're citing this document and saying, do what it says. And this is probably not it.
okay, moving on. We'll table that and do it along.
This is,
Is that the,
stormwater permit by rule application.
for State's Natural Resource Protection Act, NRPA? Yes?
It's the State of Maine Department of Environmental Protection,
It says
38 MRSA
480,
420D.
420, okay, so.
That's what this thing is.
Yeah, okay, so we definitely need to line up our ducks then, and make sure that these things all jive with each other. So that may or may not be what this is trying to get to.
Right here, this is kind of, looks like where it is indicating to us.
14 calendar days after the department received the notification form, unless the department approves the notification. Okay, so unless they approve it early,
Then it's approved after 14
Okay.
days.
or finds a notification deficient prior to that date, within this 14-day period, the time they notify. Okay, so this certainly looks to me, the way this is describing it, as a permit by notification. Because there is a, you know, there is a time ticking away that the recipient must do something before that time runs out, or the applicant gets their permit. Which is kind of the key element that, to me, makes a difference between these two terms. So, okay, permit by rule application. Ha! Fascinating. Okay, then somehow we need to perhaps more dovetail these two sections in this document. And it'd be delightful if we could actually get a real definition of permit by rule, to make sure we're not, that in both of these situations, we're potentially doing different things, but they're both permits by rule.
I might have some stuff at home that will help us. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and
Definitely.
actually, wasn't there a paper clip around here? Thank you. Okay. So I think we're, shall we say, in a different place than we were 45 minutes ago, but not necessarily
Well, we'll progress. I mean, you
in a
can
more
become more
advanced
familiar
place.
with this word,
Yep, okay.
That's for sure.
So, yeah, and you know, if we're gonna have issues, I just assume it be in a workshop rather than in a public hearing. Okay, so, Moving along, so these are the two problems here. We still need to do something with this. So I guess if we could all try to come up with some substance regarding the permit by notification and permit by rule, that would be good. Okay. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so, talking about applicability, definitions are over, we're at the top of page 5. And what I ended up doing there is, per our earlier discussion, I took the subordinate clause in the middle of the applicability section of the first paragraph, and I stuck it at the end. So, and that clause is for projects not already subject to a main DEP stormwater permit. So that now reads, this stormwater ordinance shall apply to new development within the following zones and as further qualified in 1 and 2 below for projects not already subject to a main DEP stormwater permit. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're good there. And again, 3 out of 4, because we're not all here. Okay, going on to item 1. Okay, I think the only, on the second line of item 1, the word development was changed to construction, and then a little further on in that line, the word or was changed to including. So this now says, number 1 says, all new development, including construction of a new structure or expansion of an existing structure, which may include new or expansion of decks, patios, retaining walls, accessory structures, or impervious surfaces, if it meets the threshold level of disturbance as delineated in section 525.215. So just those 2 words. Item 2, in the same section, applicability. I'm restoring that because somehow I managed to strike it out in the earlier draft. And I don't think there were any other, there weren't any other changes there. Okay, so in the next section, we had a fairly protracted discussion about the order of having exclusions before or after and precedent, etc. So I looked in the existing zoning ordinance, and I found that on page 51, there's a sound pressure level section, and page 51 on the thing that I printed out, which may or may not agree with yours. So I can tell you what it is. And it's just in a definition, in fact, and it's a precedent, but it's a very minimal precedent. Sound pressure level on page 51, definition, and it's talking about noise levels and noise level standards, and then there's an exclusion. And actually, for the first time, I realized that those are labeled in order C, A, and B. So C, A, B, C, D, E. So that's a little strange.
Oh, there's also a citation on page 45, under 592, that sets a little...
45, 590, 9.2, permit required, blah, 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 submission requirements, performance standards. So where's the exclusions or
It's moving,
exceptions?
not requiring conditions.
Okay, so permit required and exemption. So basically, I mean, there's a couple of places that do sort of dance around the structure that we're talking about here. I don't necessarily think that either one is a precedent, but as I think I mentioned earlier, anything that I think that we can get by without having to stomp on with steel-toed boots. I think I personally would feel more comfortable with that from, in other words, the document we inherited when we started this process. Minimal changes to it, only sufficient for legal purposes.
In terms of formatting, you mean?
Yeah, and just restructuring the wording and whatever. I would not call this, moving the exclusions here or there in any way a legal necessity. It's more a convention, something that perhaps is intended to be easier to read or perhaps preclude having to read quite as far. But if we leave it the way it is, I'm good with that. Having had this discussion,
Right, and we voted on that.
so I think we're
That's
good.
fine,
Okay, so, level of disturbance, we had checked that off, no change to that on page 6 in version 4. And I'm still looking for additional scribbling. So I'm a couple pages down the road now, I'm still not seeing any manual changes. Okay, and on to redevelopment. So substantially skipping forward, page 11 or 12 maybe. Yeah, page 11. Okay, so this is where the memorandum
Yeah.
from Forrest Bell, from Jennifer Jesperson, November 11, 2013 comes in. So on the version 4 document, we are talking about 525-312 redevelopment, section 3A. Excuse me, that looks different. Oh, no. It's on page 12, not 11.
Right, so it starts on 11.
Yep. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of split between the two. So the redevelopment section, item 3 at the bottom of 11A, and that's the one that we've been spinning for a bit. And that's the upshot of this opinion on November 11, 2013 from Jen Jesperson. So this, I think, what you see on version 4 reflects what we thought the first time we talked about this, that in fact, ultimately, I think, and I'll see if you guys agree with me or not, what she's saying is what we discussed, what we thought it probably meant, essentially totally reversing the logic of what it was saying. So now it says, implement measures on site so that the effective impervious area is less than 30% of the total impervious area and less than 50% of the additional proposed impervious surfaces through the application of porous media. When before it was trying to maximize effective impervious area, it is now trying to properly minimize effective impervious area. So that in comparison to the total impervious area, we want the effective impervious area to be as small as possible through the application of mediation type stuff to make it effectively.
It's disconnected.
We don't want any kind of disconnected stuff. We want to kind of take all that water and do something with it. So I believe that what you see in 3A now is what she is saying, and I'll certainly give you an opportunity to
Compared.
reread what she's saying. You have your copy of
Yeah.
that one? Okay.
Looks-
So she talks about the current citation on page 1 and the suggested wording, the current and suggested on page 2.
Yeah, they're the same, one and the same.
So what the suggested is what this thing is saying. I agree with it. I think it is what we talked about originally, that we're trying to minimize it, not maximize it.
Yeah.
And what I'm not quite sure of is why she struck out, or they struck out, at the end there, and pavement areas. I think pavement areas are pretty much synonymous with impervious surfaces, so I don't see a problem with striking it. I'm just curious why it was stricken. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I'm good with leaving it in or not leaving it in, those 3 words, and pavement areas, because I think they're largely synonymous with impervious surfaces.
Right.
Except, of course, if you've got those lovely pervious paving things, and maybe that's what the reference is. If you have pervious paving, then it's not an impervious surface. So if you leave the and pavement areas in there, you're really saying even pervious pavement is going to count against you. And I guess that makes sense. So she didn't want pervious paving to count against you, so just struck and paving areas. So if it's impervious, it's impervious. If it's not, it's not. And let the paving fall where it will, among those 2 things.
Okay, we're on board.
Okay, so, we move on?
Yeah.
All right, so at the bottom of that same page, or what used to be the same page, but is now the middle of page 12, we previously had stricken the section which talks about 525.2.3.1.3, impaired water bodies or high-quality waters. We had stricken that from the document, that paragraph. And the paragraph allows the planning board under certain circumstances to require per acre phosphorus control allocations for projects other than what is mandatory in this document. And that had been stricken largely because of, number 1, the definition of high quality waters was sort of problematic, and number 2, it was sort of stated that, why would the planning board want to do that? But last time we met, and I noticed that one thing I didn't do is strike out in the heading,
Yeah.
or high quality waters. So that,
Being impaired water body.
yes. So I got the paragraph right, but I did not strike it out in the heading. So now that heading, instead of saying impaired water bodies or high quality waters, it now just says impaired water bodies. This paragraph has been restored, with the exception of the phrase, or is located in the watershed of a high quality water, HWQ, not HNW. So now we don't have to define what a high quality water or a high water quality is. And we've avoided that problem. But we've retained the possibility that the planning board may opt to require this.
You understand why we had a concern there?
About the high quality water?
About the impaired water bodies and being able to have the discretionary authority to require a more rigorous review and water bodies that needed more protection.
Makes sense.
Okay.
I can see where there would be possibly a concern of, abuse of power or whatever.
No. The only concern would be whether the determination of the science is credible.
As determined by Maine DEP,
By the DEP,
so
so
as
if
long
they gotta
as,
start the question,
DEP says,
Okay.
then we have that.
Because it says, as determined by the Maine DEP. It's not-
Well, yeah, right, but it also says the planning board may. It doesn't say it's absolutely gonna happen even under those circumstances.
Right.
But, so it's a discretionary thing. So these 2 things really have to happen. Number 1 is that the development has to be located in the watershed of an impaired water body, and we will, in the citations, need to come up with some means of determining whether we have any of those. Understanding that Maine DEP could change that determination at any
Right.
time, but as of the time of this writing, the town of Acton either does or does not have any of those, and these are them or not.
As of now,
I mean, I don't
I know
know.
we have, I know we have some areas at risk of development, I think is the criterion we use, but we could find that out.
Okay, but, you know, the way this is stated, okay, Maine DEP, does the town of Acton have anything located in the watershed of an impaired water body? You know, do we have an impaired water body, bottom line?
Yeah.
Yes or no? If so, what is it? I mean, that's really all I'm looking for here. You know, we don't need any kind of huge paperwork, but somehow or other, you know, or maybe even a subnote, a subtext here where we just say, at the time, as of blah, blah, this water body qualified as. And then we're good, because it's very clear, you know, if you're an applicant or if you're a voter trying to figure out whether this is good for you or not, you will know, you know, whether we have any of these.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, as far as restoring this thing goes, I'm perfectly good with that.
Okay.
It's just gonna need a citation. All right, so moving on, I don't see anything on the next page. And I will, I think I'm gonna reiterate my love not of Microsoft Word, because I had a heck of a time on page 15 trying to get for A, B, C, and D to be after this table. So we'll take someone more in control of the Microsoft realm to actually do up the final version of this thing. But my intent is to have that whole glob of mess on the right here for A, B, C, and D to not be to the right of the table, but actually to the under it on page 15. So, and that actually happened when all of that got moved down. So if you look at page 3, 4, yeah, how is it that I managed to get that correct on the last one, but not this one? Well, although I know that, oh, I know what it was. This one I had to use Microsoft Word because I wanted all the footnotes to show up. And this one I used WordPad. And WordPad isn't quite as newsy. And so I was able to get it to look the way I wanted,
Yeah.
largely. But anyway, so that goes at the bottom.
Right.
And the intent here, I think the only thing in the old one, if you look at 4, an erosion sediment control plan, 4, A, B, C, and D, those were actually at the top before this table. And the reason I moved 4, A, B, C, and D down is because table 1 on page 14 is talking about table 1. So why not put table 1 immediately following where it's talked about?
Right.
And then 4, A, B, and C, and D after it. So there was no change in any of the text, it was just the positioning. Okay, and we had agreed on page 16, the 525-243, the decks, patios, retaining walls. I believe that it would largely dovetail with what section, way back when? Page 5, in the middle of page 5, item 2, where it's talking about newer expansion of decks, patios, retaining walls, accessory structures, etc. It's talking about this stuff, whether or not it meets the level of threshold of disturbance, shall meet requirements in 525-243. And here we are, 525-243. We're largely mirroring that text, and we're saying that newer expansion of decks, patios, retaining walls, accessory structures, or impervious surfaces, which is exactly how we state it here, shall meet the following requirements. We're not talking about whether or not it meets the threshold, or just saying, we're gonna do this. So on page 5, we're referring down to page 16, and on page 16, we're saying, here you go, this is what you need to do. And previously, that second section which is now on page 16, was talking about not part of the development of a new primary structure, et cetera, which basically means that, it was precluding, unless this was a standalone project, it was precluding any guidelines whatsoever. And that, unless I get a good explanation for that, it just doesn't make any sense to me that you would preclude good standard practices if in fact the retaining walls or the patios or the decks were part of a larger project. You know, you still want to do all this stuff. There's no requirements in terms of applications or any of that. It's just saying, here's some good practices that you might want to look at. Move on?
Yeah.
10 minutes ago?
Fine.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay, and that is all she wrote. So that's the only thing that we really needed to talk about. And so I guess we're really, other than the citations, we're still, you know, we're looking for a breakthrough really on this permit by notification, permit by rule thing. I think it could take any number of approaches. We could drop the definitions, we could augment the definitions, we could, you know, just eliminate the
We can look
terms.
over some
Eliminate the terms from the
documents we have.
documents.
I'll make a suggestion to that. I could bring that draft 4 into Kenny and just have him look at that
Specific.
particular section.
And it really comes down to what is supposed to happen in those two sections,
Yeah,
and then backfill to what the definition should
what
be.
handle you want.
You know, are they both gonna be the same piece of paperwork? Or are they not? And, okay, they're not. All right, so what is this called? What is that called? And maybe we could arguably not even have a definition, I don't know. But right now, it's just not real pretty.
It's pretty, it's just a little ugly.
It's sort of like a gremlin.
Are we all set for this evening?
And then AMC gremlins, purple, right out of the factory.
We'll work on citations a little bit next time with me. We do have a regularly scheduled meeting on the 23rd, I think?
Well, I think we have another workshop 2 weeks from tonight,
Yeah.
I think it's the 23rd, I think.
right on the next selectmen's meeting.
Yeah.
So is it intended that we're gonna come to the table here with having gone through the state documentation and having suggestions for what these citations are gonna be? Or should we kind of come in and hash it out?
No, let's have recommendations on the table.
Okay.
Yeah, that's much enhances the flow.
Okay. So we'll have a set of recommendations from everyone, and then hopefully we can pass that along to Jen as well. That anywhere that looks like it could use a citation, we're gonna try to come up with one, and then hash out in each case,
If it's correct.
yeah, right, what the optimal citation for that item is. And I think that the advantage of that as well is that we may not all find the same locations that we think need a citation. So, right, I think the consensus process will be helpful there.
Yeah.
Many eyes.
And I just, in terms of goals, after that meeting, and if we could put that to bed with one more meeting, I think we could give the resulting document to the planning board and Kenny for an official read-through and,
Right, and then whatever adjustment they need to do, and then once they're done with that, probably go into legal.
Yeah.
You know, and then we will shuffle it or not.
yeah.
And then we'll be ready for maybe a special town meeting, or just hold it over until the following town meeting. And-
I'd like to have an early public hearing, you know, proceeding between when the planning board signs off on it in February, March or something, and have a public hearing prior to
Before it
town
goes to
meeting.
legal?
And then, just so that while it's fresh in our mind,
Right.
and then have another public hearing.
Okay,
closer to the
and just
presentation.
to be clear, it is my understanding at this moment that any way you slice it,
This is not a legal warrant.
it's not likely at all that this is gonna show up on
It will
the.
not be.
Okay, so this will not be on this year's June town warrant 2014.
Which was a surprise to me, but I was not aware that a precedent had been, or an edict had come down for a long time.
Okay, and essentially that edict is that all town warrant article submissions need to be in by January 23rd.
Yeah,
And this,
except for the school.
This is, right, for the June,
Thank you, Virginia.
for the June warrant, and that's not gonna happen.
We're all